boardroom on the 42nd floor had floor-to-ceiling windows, and on clear days, you could see all the way to the harbor. Daniel Carter never looked at the view. He stood at the head of the table with his jacket buttoned and his hands flat on the glass surface. And he looked only at the numbers projected on the wall. Meridian Health Group. Q. 3 projections. Acquisition pipeline. 17 hospitals across 6 states, and every single one of them bled money somewhere that Daniel intended to stop. The Eastbrook facility is underperforming by 14%, he said. Cut the administrative overhead by 1/3 and restructure the nursing rotation schedule. The CFO, a heavyset man named Warren Holt, shifted in his chair. That's going to create some friction with the union rep, then manage the friction. Daniel picked up the presentation remote and advanced the slide. Next item. No one argued. That was the thing about Daniel Carter. He was 38 years old, worth somewhere north of $2 billion depending on market fluctuation, and he had not raised his voice at anyone in a professional setting in over 5 years. He did not need to. His voice was always the same, measured, low, absolute. When he said something, it was simply done. The question of whether people liked it had long since ceased to be relevant. He had not always been this way. There had been a time Warren Holt, who was old enough to have overlapped with that era, sometimes alluded to it carefully in the way people allude to weather patterns that no longer apply when Daniel Carter had been different, when he had arrived at meetings with coffee for other people as well as himself, when he had stayed after the numbers were done and asked after people's children and vacations and minor surgeries. That man was gone. Not dead, exactly. More like a room in a house that had been closed off and carpeted under and drywalled over so thoroughly that you would need a blueprint to find the door. The nickname had started somewhere in the middle years. Nobody claimed credit for it, which was how these things worked in corporate culture. One day it simply existed. The machine, his executive assistant, Priya Okafor, who had been with him for 4 years and was excellent at her job precisely because she never tried to warm him up, had overheard it once in the elevator and told him directly that was the only reason he knew. He had not reacted. That, too, was on brand. After the meeting, he took the elevator down alone, as he preferred. The ride lasted 40 seconds. He spent them checking his phone, 2 missed calls from his general counsel, a briefing memo from his VP of operations, and a calendar reminder that he had a site visit scheduled at Street Cora's Medical Center that evening. Street Cora's, the newest jewel in the Meridian crown, or it would be once they finished the acquisition. It was a private hospital in the downtown medical district, mid-sized, respected in cardiac care. Daniel had been overseeing the integration personally, which was unusual. His CFO thought it was because the deal was sensitive. That was not the reason. The real reason was that Catherine had died at Street Cora's 5 years ago, on a Tuesday in March. At 11:47 in the morning, his wife of 9 years had taken her last breath in a room on the 7th floor, while Daniel held her hand and did not cry because she had asked him not to. She had said, "I don't want that to be the last thing I see." So he had held it together. He had smiled. He had told her she was the best person he had ever known. And she had squeezed his fingers once, and then she was gone. He had not cried since. He had not laughed since, either. He had simply continued. Built the company. Closed deals. Bought hospitals. Filled the hours until they accumulated into years, and the years arranged themselves into something that looked, from the outside, like a life. The penthouse on Hargrove Street was silent when he returned that afternoon. He had 1,100 square feet of custom kitchen and never cooked. He had a terrace with a view of the whole city and never sat on it. There were no photographs on the walls. There had been, once. But he had taken them down 18 months after Catherine died. Not in grief, but in an attempt at practicality that had turned out to be its own kind of grief. He ate a prepared meal from the delivery service Priya had set up for him. He reviewed 2 contracts. He changed into a fresh shirt, because he always wore a fresh shirt. And then he drove himself to St. Cora's Medical Center at 9:15 in the evening to walk the East Wing and review the integration report in person. He liked hospitals at night. He would not have admitted it to anyone, but it was true. There was a quality to the silence, not empty, exactly, dense. The weight of all the invisible effort of keeping people alive while the rest of the city slept. The night administrator met him at the entrance and walked him through 2 floors of status updates. Daniel asked precise questions and received precise answers and made 2 notes in his leather-bound notebook. By 11:30, the administrator had been dismissed, and Daniel was alone in the East Corridor with his notebook and his cold coffee from the nurse's station. He was reviewing an HVAC report on his phone. He was about to leave, and then he heard music. It was barely music. The volume was so low it might have been imagined a piano line, something without lyrics, cycling softly through what sounded like controlled grief. Daniel stopped walking. The sound came from around the corner. The corridor here was a dead-end supply closets, a staff bathroom, a service exit that was never used after 10. There was no reason for anyone to be there. He turned the corner anyway. She had her back to him. She was in scrubs, dark green, slightly wrinkled, the kind of wrinkled that meant she had been in them for more than 12 hours. Her dark hair was pulled up in a bun that had partially come loose on one side, and she had her phone propped against the windowsill, and she was dancing. That was the only word for it, and it was completely inadequate. She was moving through something that was not quite any recognizable style, not ballet, not contemporary, not the kind of dancing people did at parties. It was private, unperformed. Her arms moved slowly. Her head tilted back, and there was something in the line of her body that made Daniel think of a person holding themselves together through sheer physical effort, like she was afraid that if she stopped moving, she would dissolve. He stood very still. He had not been moved by anything in a long time. He had watched a great deal happen without reaction: negotiations, funerals, his own company stock dropping 14 points in a single session. He had stood in the room where his wife died and felt his whole world restructure itself around an absence, and he had continued standing, but he stood in this corridor and felt something shift. He didn't understand it. He was, above everything, a man who needed to understand things. He watched her move in the half-light and felt a sensation he could only describe, distantly, as ache, as though something long calcified in his chest had developed a hairline crack. Then she turned. She saw him. For one suspended second, neither of them moved. Her face was startled, caught, and her eyes were wet. She had been crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just the kind of quiet crying that happens when you've been doing it for so long that the tears come without prompting, like weather. Then she grabbed her phone from the windowsill, and she walked very quickly past him without speaking, and she was gone. Daniel stood in the empty corridor for a long time. The faint ghost of the piano still seemed to hang in the air, though her phone was with her, and the music had stopped. He left the hospital at midnight, which was later than he had intended. He did not sleep well. He told himself it was due diligence. Meridian Health Group owned St. Cora's, which meant Daniel Carter had access to every personnel file in the building. It was not, technically, unusual for him to review them. He reviewed all manner of things. He had a reputation for granular attention to operational detail. He searched the staff directory for women in green scrubs assigned to the East Wing night rotation. There were 4. He narrowed it by the approximate age he had estimated: late 20s, maybe 30, and cross-referenced with scheduling data to find who had been on shift that night. 2 names. He eliminated one based on the hair in the file photograph. Her name was Dr. Emily Hartwell, 29 years old. Born in Dayton, Ohio. Completed her residency at St. Cora's 8 months ago, and had been retained on staff as a second-year resident in internal medicine. Her file noted an exceptional record: rarely sick, never late, consistently rated highly by supervising physicians. The notation in the margin of her last performance review, handwritten by the department chief, Dr. Marcus Reed, read, "Hartwell works harder than anyone I've ever supervised. I've told her to go home. She stays anyway." There was no emergency contact listed. The field was blank. Hospitals required it. The field was blank anyway, which meant either she had entered a name that had since become invalid, or she had left it empty on purpose. Daniel noted this with more attention than the detail probably warranted. He put the file down, picked it up again. There was a photograph, the standard ID badge image. Facing the camera directly, slight tension in the jaw, not quite smiling. Her eyes were dark and clear, and did not look like the eyes of someone who had anything to prove, which was rare in hospital staff photographs, where people usually tried to project competence or warmth. She just looked like herself. Whatever that meant. He set the file aside for the second time, and this time he left it. But the following Monday he adjusted his site visit schedule to include street choras twice a week instead of once. And he did not give Warren Holt a reason. He began arriving earlier and staying later than the integration work required. He walked different corridors. He stationed himself, with his notebook and his coffee, in positions that gave him sight lines into the wings where Dr. Hartwell's rotation ran. He told himself he was checking on operational flow. He did not examine this claim too closely. He saw her 3 times in 2 weeks. Twice she was in motion, moving between rooms, speaking to a nurse, her manner efficient and unhurried in a way that read as competence rather than indifference. The 3rd time she was standing still at the end of a corridor, pressing the heel of her hand against her sternum for a moment, just a moment, before she straightened and went back to work. He noted all of it. He understood none of it. The emergency came in on a Wednesday. Daniel was in the administration wing, reviewing the capital expenditure report with the hospital's COO, Brendan Marsh, a competent man who was nervous around Daniel in the standard way people got nervous, which was to say, he talked slightly too much when the overhead alert system engaged. Trauma Bay. Multiple casualties incoming from a highway accident. All available staff to report. Brendan Marsh started to apologize for the interruption. Daniel was already out of the chair. He did not go to the trauma bay, of course. He went to the observation window above it, which existed because the hospital had once been a teaching facility and had never gotten around to removing the gallery. He stood behind the glass and watched. She was there. He could tell it was her even before she turned the height, the particular efficiency of movement he had logged without meaning to. Dr. Hartwell moved through the chaos of the incoming cases with a quality that was difficult to name. It wasn't speed exactly. It was more that she seemed to have identified the correct action 2 seconds before anyone else, and had simply begun doing it. She was talking to a terrified young man on a gurney, late teens, bloodied, clearly in shock, and her voice was inaudible through the glass. But Daniel could see her face, and her face was completely calm, not detached. Calm. The way a mountainside is calm. Substantial. Present. She held the young man's hand. She said something that made him stop struggling. Daniel stood at the observation window for 38 minutes. He was not reviewing anything. He was simply there. After the immediate crisis had resolved, and the trauma bay had returned to something approaching order, he found himself in the hallway near the staff break room. He was not sure how he got there. He had walked there automatically in the way that a man who has been thinking about one thing, and only one thing, sometimes walks toward that thing without making a decision. She came out of the break room with a paper cup of water. She saw him. She stopped. "You're in this wing again," she said. She had a directness that he suspected was not rudeness, just economy. She was too tired for anything unnecessary. "I have access to the whole building," he said. "I know." She looked at him. "I looked you up." He had not expected that. Something in his chest registered it, not quite surprise. Something adjacent to respect. "What you did in there," he said, nodding toward the trauma bay. With the young man. She waited. It was effective. She almost smiled. It was very close. That's the goal. A pause. He did not know why he said the next thing. He said it anyway. "Why do you dance?" The almost smile disappeared. She looked at him for a long moment. He expected her to walk away. She was clearly capable of walking away. She had done it before, in the corridor, without hesitation. She said, "So I don't fall apart." She said it flatly, not dramatically. as though she was reporting a fact that was simply accurate and therefore not shameful. Daniel stood very still. In 5 years, he had not heard anyone say something that hit him quite like that. The language of, "so I don't fall apart." The acknowledgement of the effort required to remain intact landed somewhere in him that had not been touched in a very long time. He said, "That makes sense." She looked at him as though she wasn't sure whether he meant it. He meant it. She walked away. He watched her go. His coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, and he drank it anyway. He did not intend to investigate further. He told himself that over the course of the next week, while he did exactly that, it was not surveillance in any meaningful sense. It was, he framed it to himself, a matter of understanding the operational landscape, of knowing the people who worked in the hospitals his company was integrating. This was normal due diligence. He was aware he was lying to himself. He had always been a clear-eyed man. The lies we tell ourselves are the ones we can see through and choose not to. What he found through the personnel file, through a conversation with Dr. Marcus Reed that he framed as a routine integration check, through a news article from 7 years ago that he found by chance when he searched her name and her hometown together, was this: Emily Hartwell had a younger sister. Her name had been Claire. Claire Hartwell had been 22 when she was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition, the kind of diagnosis that comes with a price tag attached. And the price tag had been significant: experimental treatment, 3 specialists, 2 years of medication that insurance did not cover. Their parents were gone by then. Emily had been 24 and in her 2nd year of medical school, which meant she had almost nothing. She had worked 3 jobs. She had borrowed money and paid it back and borrowed more. She had taken on the student debt and taken on the credit card debt and done what people do when they love someone more than they love their own stability. It had not been enough. Claire Hartwell had died 4 years ago, 3 months before a clinical trial opened that might have changed the outcome. The news article was a small one, a local Dayton paper, a short piece about the trial and a family who had almost made it. Emily was not quoted. The reporter mentioned her briefly in passing. The older sister, a medical student who had advocated tirelessly for her sibling. Daniel read it twice. He sat in his penthouse, in the silence he had built around himself, and looked at those words, advocated tirelessly. He thought about the empty emergency contact field. He thought about the notation from Dr. Reed. "I've told her to go home. She stays anyway." He thought about a woman dancing alone in a hospital corridor at 2 in the morning, crying without knowing anyone was watching. He understood her now in a way that he had not had the vocabulary for before. Not entirely, he did not presume that. But enough. Enough to recognize what he was looking at. She worked herself to the bone because it was the only penance and the only purpose she had left. The work was the atonement. The work was the proof that this time she would be enough. He knew what it was to build a fortress out of your own grief and call it productivity. He sat with that for a while. That evening, later than was reasonable, he drove to Street Cora's. He told himself it was for the integration. He walked down the east corridor. He stood at the junction near the supply closet and the service exit. She was there. She was not dancing this time. She was sitting against the wall with her knees drawn up and her eyes closed, her head tilted back. Her hands were loose in her lap. She was not crying. She was not moving. She was simply existing in the only quiet available to her at this hour. He should have left. He sat down on the floor on the opposite side of the corridor instead. He took out his phone and set it face down on the linoleum and looked at the ceiling. After a long moment, she opened her eyes and looked at him. "You're sitting on the floor," she said. "So are you." She looked back at the ceiling. Fair point. They sat in silence for 11 minutes. He counted. Not because he was measuring it, but because counting was a thing he did when he had nothing else to do with the part of his brain that always needed to be occupied. When she stood to go back to work, she did not say anything, but she nodded at him. He nodded back. He sat there for another minute after she had gone, just sat on the linoleum floor of the hospital corridor, like someone who had forgotten, temporarily, that he was the CEO of a company worth more than $2 billion and let the silence settle around him. It was a different kind of silence than the penthouse. The penthouse silence was airtight. This one breathed. He drove home thinking that he had not felt this much like a human being in a very long time. The thought arrived with a secondary thought attached. The way important things often travel in pairs. If you can feel this, much after 11 minutes on a corridor floor, what have you been doing with the other 5 years? He did not have a good answer. He sat in his car in the underground garage for 4 minutes before going inside. He told himself he was finishing a thought. He was not finishing a thought. He was sitting in the dark with his hands on the steering wheel, reluctant to go back inside. Because going inside meant the silence started again. And he was suddenly, acutely, no longer sure the silence was something he wanted. That was a new development. He noted it. He went inside anyway. He sat at his kitchen counter and opened his laptop and looked at the integration report for 12 minutes before he realized he had not read a single word. He closed it. He thought, I have been efficient. I have been successful. I have been everything that the version of me before Catherine would have found impressive, but I have not been present. Not for a long time. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and thought about the nod she had given him, small, unperformed, extended from one person to another, without ceremony. And he slept for the first time in weeks, without waking at 3 in the morning. Things shifted in small ways after that. As things tend to do when you are not watching them carefully, he began arriving at Street Cora's in the early evening, before the building went quiet, and he lingered in the corridors near the internal medicine wing, not always, not obviously, but enough that the night shift receptionist, a young man named Patrick Doyle who had the excellent quality of minding his own business, simply began nodding at Daniel when he came in rather than asking for his badge. Emily noticed. She was the kind of person who noticed things. She did not confront him right away. Instead, she began, gradually, to not avoid him, which was different from seeking him out, but which Daniel recognized as the more meaningful choice. She passed him in the corridor one evening and said, without stopping, "The vending machine on 3 has good coffee. The one on 2 is terrible." He amended his evening routine accordingly. 3 days later, she sat across from him in the small family waiting room that was empty after 9 o'clock, and they shared a table and ate their respective dinners, hers from the hospital cafeteria, his from a container Priya had packed without talking for 20 minutes, and it was the most comfortable 20 minutes Daniel had experienced in longer than he could accurately date. Then she said, "You don't smile much." "No," he said. "Why?" He looked at her. She was eating a bowl of pasta with a plastic fork, and she was looking at him with the same directness she brought to everything, not aggressive, not performative. Just honest inquiry. "It stopped being my default," he said. She seemed to find this sufficient. She did not push. He appreciated that with a specificity that surprised him. "Claire used to say I was too serious," she said after a moment. Then she stopped, as though she had not intended to say that. "Claire?" he said carefully. She looked at her pasta. "My sister." A pause. "She died. I'm sorry." "Yeah." She pushed a piece of penne around the bowl. She was funny. Like, genuinely funny. The kind of person who could make anyone laugh. She paused again. "I don't really have that." "The dancing," he said. She looked up. "It's how you keep her," he said. Not a question. She held very still. "Then, she taught me. When we were kids. In the kitchen, before school." She said. She stopped. She pressed her mouth together for a moment. She said dancing is just the body remembering joy, even when the brain forgets. Daniel said nothing. He was thinking about Catherine. He was thinking about a woman who had loved brightly and without reservation, and who had asked him, at the end, not to let his face be the last thing she saw before it collapsed in grief. He had kept that promise. He had kept it for 5 years. "She sounds like someone worth missing," he said. Emily looked at him for a long time. There was something in her expression, careful, guarded, that was beginning, very slowly, to rearrange itself. "You're not what I expected," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "What did you expect? From the file?" She shrugged. Someone less present. He did not know what to do with that. He filed it somewhere. She went back to work. He sat for a moment longer in the empty waiting room, with his hands around a cup of coffee that was exactly the temperature he had said was wrong but which he had not corrected, because correcting it would have required going somewhere. And he had not wanted to go anywhere. His phone buzzed. A contract notification. He silenced it. Outside, through the narrow window near the ceiling, the city continued its relentless project of existing. He sat in the quiet and felt, with some alarm, that he was becoming a person again. It was Patrick Doyle who did it, and he did it without malice, which made it worse. Emily had come in to sign for a delivery, and Patrick had looked up from his desk and said, pleasantly, "Oh, Dr. Hartwell, Mr. Carter was asking about your rotation schedule yesterday. He wanted to make sure the integration review didn't interfere with the night shift." Then he had gone back to his computer, because Patrick Doyle had the quality of someone who did not understand why information delivery might be significant. Emily had gone very still. Integration review. She had been aware, of course, that Daniel was there in an official capacity. She was not naive. She had looked him up. CEO of Meridian Health Group, Acquiring Street, Coras. She had known the context. But knowing the context and being told, in those specific words, that he had been asking about her schedule, had been tracking her schedule, was a different thing entirely. She found him on the 4th floor, outside the records room, alone with his notebook. She stood in the doorway. He looked up. "You requested my rotation schedule," she said. He did not pretend not to know what she was referring to. She gave him credit for that. "I did," he said. "Why?" He put the notebook down. He took a breath. "I wanted to know when you'd be here. That's not an operational reason." "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at him and her face was not angry, or not only angry. It was something more complicated. Something that lived in the same territory as fear, but fear of a specific kind. The kind that comes not from danger but from exposure, from being seen. "You went through my file," she said. "Silence. I know where you eat dinner," she said. "I know you wait in the East Corridor. I know you've been here 3 times this week when there's nothing operational that requires 3 site visits." She stopped. Her voice was steady. She was very good at steady. "What are you doing, Mr. Carter?" He stood up from his chair. Not to advance toward her, he moved toward the window, putting distance between them. He put his hands in his pockets. He looked out at the gray afternoon sky, and then back at her. "I don't have a good answer to that," he said. "True." He was quiet for a moment. "I saw something in you that I recognized, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I just stayed near it." She stared at him. "That's not nothing. That's still surveillance." "You're right." He said it without qualification. "I went through the personnel file. I found things I probably shouldn't have been looking for. That was..." He stopped. It was wrong. She seemed unprepared for the direct admission. Something in her posture shifted slightly. "I'm not a project," she said. "I know. I'm not something for you to fix. I know that too." She looked at him for a long time. He let her look. He had nothing to hide behind, which was an unfamiliar sensation. "I need to think," she said. She left. He did not follow. He stood in the records room and looked at his notebook and thought that for the first time in 5 years, he had something at stake in a conversation that was not about money or contracts or outcomes he could control. He drove home very carefully. The way you drive when your hands need something to do. She avoided him. She did it professionally and without hostility, which in some ways was harder than anger would have been. She changed her routes through the hospital. She was never in the East Corridor at night. She was always with someone, a colleague, a patient, a nurse, when their paths might otherwise have crossed. He retreated. He scaled back the site visits to once a week, then to the minimum that operational necessity required. He stopped arriving early and staying late. He did not go to the East Corridor at all. He went back to the penthouse. He went back to the contracts and the reports and the silence. He went back to the life he had built, which was efficient and correct, and absolutely airless. The weeks had a quality of sameness to them that he had once found stabilizing and now found oppressive. He reviewed acquisition reports. He sat in boardrooms. He said the things that needed saying in the register that needed saying them. Warren Holt told him he looked tired. He told Warren Holt to focus on the quarterly numbers. He ate prepared meals alone. He did not sleep particularly well. On a Tuesday, very late 11 days after the conversation in the records room, he drove to Street Cora's. He did not have a reason that would have survived examination. He did not go inside. He parked across the street and sat in his car and looked at the lit windows of the upper floors and thought about Catherine. He thought about a woman who had taught herself to keep joy in her body even when her mind had lost track of it. He thought about a woman in dark green scrubs, alone in a corridor, dancing to keep from falling apart. And the way that had cracked something open in him that he had been careful, for years, to keep sealed. He thought, I built this closed life because I thought it was protection. I thought if nothing could get in, nothing else could be lost. He thought, that was not protection, that was just loss at a slower speed. He got out of the car. He went inside. The night administrator knew him and nodded and did not stop him. He walked to the east corridor. It was empty. He stood at the junction where he had first seen her, where the supply closets ran along the wall and the service exit stood unused, and he looked at the windowsill where she had propped her phone. He heard the piano in his memory. The specific timbre of controlled grief. He thought about Catherine, who had loved to dance badly at kitchen parties and had laughed at herself doing it, and who had told him once that the point wasn't to be good at it. The point was just to be in your body for a few minutes, instead of inside your head. You spend too much time in your head, she had said. He was standing in an empty hospital corridor at 11:40 at night. He took out his phone. He typed a message. I owe you more than an apology. When you're ready, I'd like to try. Daniel Carter. He did not send it. He held it in his drafts. He stood there for a long time. Then he sent it. She did not reply that night. He had not expected her to. He drove home and slept better than he had in 11 days, which was not the same as sleeping well but was directionally meaningful. She replied at 6:43 in the morning. He was on his second coffee and his first conference call of the day. He looked at his phone and stepped out of the call, something he had not done in years, to read the message. Tomorrow evening. The family waiting room on 3. I get a break at 8. A pause, and then, bring real food. The cafeteria pasta is starting to haunt me. He sent Priya an unusually specific catering request, and she asked no questions because she was excellent at her job. He arrived at 7:58 with a bag from the Italian place that Catherine had loved, which he recognized as a significant choice, and made it anyway. Emily was already there. She was in her scrubs. Of course she was always in her scrubs, and she had her arms crossed, not defensively, just like a person who was braced for something. He set the food on the table. He sat down. I should have led with this, he said, so I'll lead with it now. She waited. My wife died 5 years ago. Ovarian cancer. She was treated here at Street Cora's. She died on the 7th floor. Room 714. He said it the way he always said difficult things, without decoration. The facts, in order. Her name was Catherine. She was 33 years old. Emily did not say she was sorry. She just listened. He gave her credit for that. I have built the past 5 years in a way that I would describe as functional, and that people who know me would describe as inhuman. I am aware of both descriptions. He looked at his hands on the table. I came to this hospital because acquiring it felt like doing something, like it mattered. I don't know anymore if that's true. She was still listening. When I saw you that night in the corridor, I thought I was seeing someone in pain, and then I thought I was seeing something else. He paused. I recognized it. Someone who has figured out that falling apart is not an option, and has found their own system for preventing it. Emily unfolded her arms. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. Mine was work, he said. Yours is the dancing. The dancing is, he stopped. and said something he had not planned to say. "It's braver, honestly." She looked up at him. "My system kept everything out," he said. "Yours keeps something in." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Claire would have thought that was poetic." "It's not meant to be poetic. It's just what I see." Another silence. A different kind. Not uncomfortable. "You scared me," she said. "When I found out you'd been watching. Knowing things about me. Yes, I don't want to be someone's project. I know." He met her eyes. "I don't want that either. I don't actually know what I want. That's the honest truth. I spent 5 years not wanting anything, and then I stood in a corridor at 2 in the morning, and something just..." He stopped. He tried again. "You didn't save me. I want to be clear about that. I don't believe in that kind of story. You just made me remember that I used to be a person who felt things, and I had forgotten that person so completely, I'd almost stopped believing he'd ever existed." Emily looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were bright, not quite crying. Something just before it. "I'm not ready," she said. "I need you to understand that. I'm still..." She paused, and he could see her choosing words carefully. "I'm still in the middle of things. I'm not a person who has finished grieving. I'm not a person who has figured out how to need something from someone. I understand that. Do you?" "Yes," he said, "because I'm the same." She looked down at the food he had brought. She reached forward and opened one of the containers. She picked up a fork. "Okay," she said, "tell me about her." He blinked. "If you want to," she added quickly. He did not look away. "She was..." He stopped. Started again. "She laughed too loudly in movie theaters. She had an opinion about every restaurant she ever went to. And she was almost always right. She read novels the way some people watch sporting events, completely invested, outraged, triumphant." He paused. "She loved dancing. Badly. On purpose." Emily smiled. Just slightly, just enough. "She sounds wonderful," she said. "She was," he said. And something about saying it out loud in that room, to this specific person who understood without requiring explanation, made the sentence feel like a door rather than a wall. He ate his food. She ate hers. They did not solve anything that evening. They did not reach conclusions, or make promises, or arrange their futures. They simply sat in the waiting room on the 3rd floor and talked about the people they had lost, and the silence between topics felt like rest rather than distance. When she went back to work, she paused in the doorway. "Same time Thursday?" she said. He said, "Yes." The cardiac arrest came in at 11:40 on a Friday. A man named George Whitfield, 64, retired electrician, 2 stents already. His wife had called the ambulance at 11:20 and ridden in the back holding his hand, and when they brought him in, she had stood in the hallway outside the trauma bay with her arms wrapped around herself, and nobody had time to stop and be with her, because everyone had to be with him. Anna Pierce was in the middle of her shift. She had been a nurse at Street Cora's for 11 years. She was 43, a tall, angular woman with calm gray eyes and the particular quality of stillness that comes not from detachment, but from enormous investment, the kind of person who is so fully present that they appear motionless. She had been there the night Daniel had first stood in the East Corridor looking lost. She had been there for most of the evening since. She had watched all of it, with the quiet attention that was her defining characteristic. She was the one who found Carol Whitfield standing in the hallway. Holding herself together, Anna sat down next to her without asking. She did not offer platitudes. She did not perform comfort. She simply sat there, which was sometimes the most sophisticated thing a person could do. Inside the trauma bay, Emily was working. She had been there 40 minutes when the rhythm stabilized. Then, another 20 before she was confident enough to step back and let the team manage the monitoring. She came through the doors and found Anna Pierce sitting with a woman she didn't know. And Anna looked up and shook her head very slightly, which meant not yet. And she's okay simultaneously. Emily nodded. She walked to the nurse's station and leaned both hands on the counter and closed her eyes and breathed. She was bone-tired. She had been bone-tired for so long it had become her baseline. He's stable. She opened her eyes. Daniel was standing near the entrance to the wing. Not close. Not intrusive. He was standing in the particular way he had developed present, without presuming, and he had 2 cups of coffee from the machine on 3 that she had told him was the good one. She crossed to him and took the coffee. "How long have you been here?" she asked. "Since 9. He paused. "I wasn't tracking your schedule. I just wanted to be somewhere that felt useful." She looked at him. His suit jacket was folded over his arm. He had his sleeves rolled up, which she had never seen before. He looked like a man who had stopped performing something. "It's Friday," she said. "I know. You could be anywhere. I know that too." She drank her coffee. The fluorescent light above them hummed. Somewhere down the corridor, Carol Whitfield was probably learning that her husband had made it through the night. Anna appeared from around the corner. She saw them, Daniel with his coffee, and Emily with hers, standing in the quiet corridor, and something in her expression did a small, careful thing that was not quite a smile, but was its cousin. "The wife is okay," Anna said. "She wants to see him." "I'll take her," Emily said, and pushed off the wall. She stopped. She turned back to Daniel. "Wait here?" she said. "Yes," he said. She went. Anna stood in the corridor. She looked at Daniel Carter, this closed, precise man who had been slowly opening over the past weeks like a window that had been painted shut, and she said, "You're good at waiting." "I've had a lot of practice," he said. "Different kind," she said. He looked at her. He had known Anna Pierce peripherally the way you know all the staff in a hospital you're acquiring. But he had never had a conversation with her that was not transactional. "You've been watching me," he said. "Not an accusation. I watch everyone," she said. "It's my job." He considered this. "What do you see?" She tilted her head. "A man who's been trying to earn something. He's not sure what exactly, but he's trying." She paused. "That's not nothing," he said. "She told me she's not ready." "She told you the truth," Anna said. "That's worth something too." A sound from down the corridor, Carol Whitfield's voice. Higher than before, bright with relief. They both turned instinctively. They couldn't see anything. But the quality of the sound was unmistakable. Good news, traveling at its usual unpredictable speed. "She'll get there," Anna said. "Not tonight." "But she will." She went back to her rounds. Daniel stood in the corridor with his coffee and thought about the word there, where there was. Whether it was a destination or just a direction. Whether it mattered which one. Emily came back 40 minutes later. She looked wrung out, in the specific way that happens after you have spent all your reserves and then spent the reserves you didn't know you had. "How's he doing?" Daniel asked. "He'll make it," she said. His wife held his hand the whole time. She paused. She said she's been holding his hand for 41 years. Said she wasn't about to stop now. Daniel was quiet. "I want that," Emily said. Then she looked startled, as though she hadn't meant to say it out loud. "So do I," Daniel said. She looked at him. He looked at her. The corridor was empty, and the light was its usual institutional yellow, and somewhere a monitor beeped in steady rhythm, which was the sound of things continuing. "I'm still not ready," she said. "I know, but I'm less," she searched for the word, "less closed than I was." "That's enough," he said. "Is it?" He thought about it seriously, which was the only way he knew how to think. "Yes," he said. "That's more than enough. That's where things start." She sat down against the wall. After a moment, he sat down next to her. Not too close. Appropriate distance. "Tell me something Catherine would have said right now," Emily said. He thought. She would have said, "Sit on the floor of a hospital with a tired doctor at midnight and tell me again how you have no time for anything." He paused. She had a way of pointing out the gap between what you said you were and what you actually were. Emily laughed. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. It was not a big laugh, it was a quiet one, exhausted and genuine, and it came out like something that had been waiting for a way in. She pressed her hand over her mouth immediately after, as if surprised by herself. He sat very still. That was how it happened. Not dramatically, not in the way he had imagined, in the abstract, when he had imagined things at all. It was just a woman laughing in a hospital corridor at midnight, her hand over her mouth, her eyes bright, her body unclenching from the long day, and Daniel Carter, who had not laughed himself in 5 years, who had built a life out of the useful rubble of his grief, who had stood in a corridor and watched a stranger dance and felt something crack open in his chest. Daniel Carter looked at her and felt the corners of his mouth move. Not much. Just enough. A beginning. 3 weeks later, Anna Pierce found him in the 4th floor records room, which had become, without anyone officially designating it, a place where he did his actual thinking. "She's dancing again," Anna said, in the corridor. "Thought you should know." He put down his notebook. He walked to the east corridor. He turned the corner. She had her phone on the windowsill. The music was the same piano, the controlled, grieving kind, but the quality of the movement was different. Something had shifted in the line of her body. She was still dancing alone, but she was not holding herself together anymore. Or she was, but differently. Not clenched. Open. She heard him come around the corner. She did not stop. She held out her hand. He looked at it for a moment. He was not a man who danced. He had not danced since Catherine. He had not done a great many things since Catherine that were, it turned out, not optional. They were necessary, and the years without them had proved it. He took her hand. He did not know the steps. She did not appear to expect him to. They moved in the half-light of the hospital corridor, awkward and slow, and completely without performance. He did not laugh. He did not need to. He was simply there. And outside, through the narrow corridor window, the city went on with its vast, indifferent project of being alive. Cars on wet streets, lights in high windows, people in rooms doing the quiet, invisible work of staying intact. None of them knew that in a hospital corridor on the East Wing, a man who had not laughed in 5 years was standing in half-light, holding the hand of a woman who danced to keep from breaking, and that both of them were, very slowly, beginning to understand that keeping yourself from breaking and allowing yourself to heal were not the same thing. That healing required something beyond effort. It required another person, not to save you, not to fix you, not to take the weight from your hands and carry it themselves, just to be there, to show up in the corridor, to sit on the floor when sitting was all there was, to say, "I am also still figuring this out. And I am not going anywhere." That was the thing Catherine had known, that he had forgotten. That was the thing Claire had known, in her kitchen in the mornings before school, that Emily was only now beginning to remember. The piano cycled through its quiet measures. They moved, slowly, in the half-light, and for the first time in 5 years, that was enough.